He was a billionaire, but completely alone. 5 years after losing his wife and unborn child, Ethan's world had turned to silence, until one freezing night, when he saw a woman and her little girl shivering on a park bench. That single moment changed everything. Was it fate, or was it God's way of reminding him that miracles still walk among us? Watch till the end, because this story will touch the part of your heart you thought was gone. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel for more faith-filled stories that warm the soul. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you and your family with peace, love, and miracles every single day. Seattle wore winter like an iron mask that night, a hard, glittering face that reflected the streetlights in icy fragments. Wind heaved in off the sound and ran the length of the avenues with a blade's edge, scouring the bare branches that clawed at apartment windows and rattling the metal grates of shuttered storefronts. The sky was the color of pewter, and the air smelled faintly of salt and diesel. Snow came down in small, insistent flakes, never soft, always purposeful, building a crust along the sidewalks and turning the steep streets into quiet, treacherous plains. Traffic thinned to a hum. Buses hissed past like tired beasts. Sirens were far away and intermittent, the city's heartbeat slowed by the cold. North of downtown, where the hills rose and the houses shouldered pines and fir, a glass and steel tower punched a narrow sheen into the gloom. From revolving doors that burped pockets of heated air into the night, a man in a charcoal overcoat stepped out with the unstudied economy of someone who disliked wasting movement. He was tall and spare, with a frame that had thinned rather than softened with age, long legs in dark wool trousers, a coat that hung like a straight line, shoulders squared by habit, not pride. His name was Ethan Cole, 45, founder and majority owner of an enterprise software company, whose code ran invisibly beneath banks, carriers, and the government agencies that never admitted their dependencies. The public told themselves a story about men like him, genius, relentless, lucky. The truer story, if anyone had cared to ask, was that Ethan had forgotten how to be anything but disciplined. His face carried that discipline like a map, cheekbones sharply cut, a jaw that held its angle even at rest, a mouth that rarely rose at the corners unless he remembered to raise it, and eyes the gray of seawater when the sun never comes out. A few days' beard shadowed his chin and throat, not from neglect, but because he had never learned what to do with spare hours. People who worked for him used the same 3 words: precise, private, fair. In meetings, he spoke in clean lines, preferring nouns and verbs to adjectives. In hallways, he nodded once and meant it. He remembered the names of junior engineers and the color of the carpet in the basement data center, because memory, to Ethan, was an exercise in respect. He wore a wedding ring that no one remarked upon anymore. 5 winters earlier, in a hospital room that still visited him in his sleep, the soft beeping had slowed and then stopped, and the world that followed shrank to a single hallway that had no end. His wife had died in labor. Their son never took a breath. There had been a nurse with kind hands who said, "I'm sorry," as if the word could wrap anything. There had been a chaplain in a blue cardigan who asked whether he wanted to call anyone. Ethan had shaken his head because there was no one to call who could come fast enough to alter the physics of loss. After, men from the board had put hands on his shoulder and said they would hold the line. Women from HR had left floral arrangements and grief brochures that curled at the edges as the water evaporated. The house in North Seattle where they had planned to argue over paint colors and crib brands became a museum of good intentions. Unopened boxes, a rocking chair under a sheet, a folded quilt from his mother with stars and moons stitched in navy thread. Only one thing in the museum moved. Rex had arrived in the last months of his wife's pregnancy, a male German shepherd, now 6 years old, 80 pounds of sinew and judgment, with a sable coat that ran from dark saddle to lighter flanks, and an old scar he had not earned across one ear. The breeder had promised a steady temperament. The trainer had called him a thinking dog, the kind that waits at thresholds and watches faces before he decides who you are. Rex's amber eyes were full of consideration. His muzzle had begun to silver along the edges. His gait was soundless on hardwood and authoritative on gravel. He slept light, woke without complaint, ate from a stainless steel bowl with the seriousness of a ritual, and checked the perimeter after dusk without being asked. Ethan spoke to him in complete sentences because complete sentences felt like a way to keep the world arranged. He still keeps a second, smaller bowl beside Rex's, as if order might coax the past into behaving. On nights when the house was particularly quiet, he would straighten the little bowl by a fraction until it sat parallel to the big one, then step back and stand there a long time, his hands opening and closing against the ache that had never learned to leave. The doorman at the tower raised a gloved hand. "Night, Mr. Cole." And Ethan returned the gesture with a small crease at one corner of his mouth. He did not like to be called sir, and the staff had learned that Mr. Cole would do. He crossed to the curb where his electric SUV idled, Rex visible in the rear through the glass, head lifted, ears angled, the set of him saying he had already inventoried the lobby, the sidewalk, and the approaches. The dog's breath fogged the window in a faint fan. Ethan opened the door. "Go on," he said, and Rex flowed from the back seat to the passenger footwell, and then, at a small tap on the dash, returned to the rear again, settling with a sigh that contained a thesis on patience. The roads home traced a route he could drive with his eyes closed. Up along Westlake, where the water darkened into a single slab, past houseboats with lighted squares in their sides, through an arterial that climbed into neighborhoods where porches had strings of white bulbs and the snow accumulated in tidy triangles along railing spindles. Ethan kept the cabin heat low because he preferred the sting that made him feel located. He kept the radio off and the notifications silenced. He drove as he conducted his mornings, alert, spare, deliberate. In the mirror, streetlights skated over Rex's eyes and were absorbed. He had intended to go directly home, to the tract of trees behind the house and the silent lights beyond. But halfway through the parkway, a motion of color stopped him. The snow fell thicker there, muffling the world to a whisper. Beneath the pines, on a wooden bench half buried under white, a woman sat, wrapped in a cardigan too thin for the weather, arms around a small, unmoving bundle. For a moment, he thought it was another statue of grief, until the bundle stirred, and a faint cry rose into the air, soft and desperate. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The scene fractured the careful surface of his restraint, because it looked like something that had been stolen from a dream he had too often. His wife's hair against hospital white. Her arms curved protectively, though there was no breath beneath them. He pulled over, the tires whispering through slush, and the headlights fell over the woman and child like a quiet revelation. Snow glimmered in her hair, and her shoulders trembled with each breath. Rex lifted his head in the back seat, ears forward, his gaze steady on the shapes outside. For a long moment, Ethan did not move. Then, without knowing why except that it felt like obedience to a voice he could no longer hear, he opened the door and stepped into the cold. The snow thickened as Ethan closed the car door behind him, his breath turning to smoke in the air. The cold bit through his gloves and the crunch beneath his boots sounded louder than it should have in the muffled park. Rex padded beside him, a silent shadow whose amber eyes glowed faintly in the reflected light of the SUV's headlights. The woman on the bench startled when Ethan called out softly, "Ma'am?" She looked up as if surfacing from underwater, eyes wide, face drained of color, lips trembling not only from cold, but from something older and more brittle. Fear. Her name, he would learn later, was Grace Miller. She appeared to be around 30, maybe a little younger, though hardship blurred the edges of youth. Grace had long, ash-blonde hair matted by the snow, skin that once might have been radiant, but was now pale as candle wax, and cheekbones that cut sharp against the dim light. Her coat, a once cream wool now dulled with age and dirt, hung open where a button had come loose. Inside, she clutched a small child wrapped in a threadbare pink blanket, its fabric so thin Ethan could see the tremor of movement beneath it. The child whimpered, a fragile sound that made Rex lift his head, ears pricking forward. Grace's voice, when it came, was hoarse. "Please, don't come closer." Her accent was faintly Midwestern, her words careful, defensive, like someone who'd learned to weigh each syllable before releasing it. Ethan stopped a few feet away, raising his hands slightly in reassurance. "It's all right," he said quietly. "I just want to make sure you're safe." The little girl shifted in her mother's arms, a soft, sleepy face peeking from beneath the blanket. She couldn't have been more than 6, small for her age, with auburn curls that tangled over her forehead and eyes the color of lake water before a storm. "I'm not cold, Mommy," she mumbled, though her lips were blue. Grace pulled her closer. "It's okay, Lily, go back to sleep." Then she looked at Ethan again, suspicion warring with exhaustion. "I'm Ethan Cole," he said, his tone calm, deliberate, the same one he used with anxious board members and reporters. "I live nearby. It's dangerous to stay out here tonight. Please, let me help." Grace hesitated, her gaze flicking between the man's face and the large dog beside him. "You have a dog," she said cautiously. "He won't hurt us?" Ethan glanced down at Rex, who sat obediently, tail still, posture perfect. "He's trained. His name's Rex. He won't move unless I tell him to." The dog tilted his head, sensing the tension but reading his owner's tone, and exhaled softly, almost like a sigh. Grace's shoulders eased a fraction. I don't want any trouble," she whispered. "We're just waiting for the bus." Ethan glanced around. There was no bus stop, only the park's empty path and snow gathering in drifts. "There's no bus, running this late, not in this weather," he said. The words came out sharper than he intended, and Grace flinched. He softened his voice. "You'll both freeze out here. Please, come with me. I can take you somewhere warm just for the night." The child stirred again, eyes fluttering open. "Mommy, who's that?" she asked. "It's okay, Lily," Grace murmured, brushing snow from her daughter's hair. "Just someone passing by." Then, as if the act of speaking cracked something inside her, she added faintly, "We don't have anywhere to go." Ethan stepped closer and shrugged off his coat, draping it gently over the woman's shoulders before she could protest. The movement startled her, but the heavy warmth made her close her eyes for a moment. She smelled cedar and faint detergent. He smelled the chill of wind and something steady, something clean. Rex rose when Ethan gestured, circling once before standing by the girl. The dog lowered his head until his nose brushed the child's mitten. Lily giggled weakly, a tiny sound in the dark. "He's soft," she said. Rex's tail thumped once, measured and slow. Ethan helped Grace to her feet. She swayed, knees locking as though unused to standing after hours in the cold. "My car's right there," he said, pointing to the SUV idling by the curb. "You can warm up while we figure something out." Grace opened her mouth to refuse, but Lily tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy, I'm so tired." That was the end of it. Grace nodded. "Okay." He led them carefully, his steps deliberate to break the icy crust ahead. Grace walked with a limp so faint he almost missed it, favoring her left side. He guessed an old injury. Her shoes were soaked through, and each step left wet prints shaped like surrender. Inside the car, heat blossomed instantly. Rex settled back into his space, watching as Grace adjusted the vents toward Lily. The girl leaned into the warmth and fell asleep almost immediately, her small body curling instinctively toward the dog's quiet presence. Grace stared at her daughter for a long time before whispering, "She hasn't slept in a bed for 3 nights." Ethan started the car moving. "You're from Seattle?" he asked. She shook her head. "Portland. We came up last month. I thought, maybe a new start." Her voice caught on the words. "But things don't work that way, do they?" Ethan didn't press. Instead, he asked softly, "Where's her father?" Grace turned toward the window, watching the snow smear past the glass. "He drinks," she said finally. "He gets angry. When he drinks, everything breaks. Plates, doors, promises." She looked down at her hands, knuckles raw from cold. "Last night, he threw us out, said he didn't want mouths to feed anymore." Ethan said nothing. He had learned, after years of dealing with pain, his and others, that silence was sometimes the only decent answer. When they reached the iron gates of his property, Grace's eyes widened. "This is your house?" she asked. The driveway curved through tall pines, lights spilling over the snow like amber water. "It's home," Ethan replied. "For now, it's yours too." He parked by the entrance and came around to help her. Grace hesitated again, then accepted his hand. Her fingers were ice. The warmth of his palm startled her. She hadn't realized how long it had been since another human touch felt safe. Inside, the house smelled faintly of pine and coffee. The fire in the hearth crackled back to life as Ethan fed it logs. Lily stirred awake, blinking at the high ceilings and soft light. "Mommy, it's pretty," she whispered. Grace crouched beside her, brushing tears she hadn't meant to shed. "Say thank you," she said. Lily turned to Ethan. "Thank you, mister." He smiled faintly, kneeling so their eyes met. "You're welcome, Lily. Rex will keep an eye on you tonight." The girl grinned sleepily at the dog, who had already stretched out near the hearth, tail tapping once like approval. Later, when the house had gone quiet, Ethan stood by the doorway of the guest room where Grace and Lily slept. The room was dim except for the firelight from the hall. He heard Lily's small voice murmur through the door, soft and contented. "Mommy, it's warm here." Grace whispered something in reply that he couldn't make out. He turned to go, and Rex padded up beside him, resting his head lightly against Ethan's hand. Ethan looked down at the dog's solemn eyes. "Maybe this is it," he said under his breath. "Maybe this is the moment." Rex blinked, slow and deliberate, as if to say he agreed. Outside, snow kept falling, but inside the old house the air had changed. Warmer, gentler, as though something long frozen had begun to stir again. Morning light crawled reluctantly across the frosted windows of the Cole residence, washing the living room in a pale gold that could not quite chase away the chill. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world sealed in white. Grace awoke to the muted quiet of a house that did not yet belong to her, but had already begun to feel different, warmer, alive. She wrapped herself in a borrowed robe, the thick fabric brushing her thin wrists, and stepped into the kitchen. The room smelled faintly of coffee and wood polish, everything orderly in that restrained, masculine way. Ethan's home was not ostentatious. It was elegant by habit, not display, filled with dark wood and steel, the design of a man who appreciated silence more than company. Grace moved carefully, still uncertain which cupboards held what. Her hair, now brushed and loose, fell in soft waves of pale gold against the robe's dark fabric. She had regained some color in her cheeks, but her eyes still held that deep, distant fatigue, something carved there by years of surviving rather than living. She found a pan and began cracking eggs with practiced efficiency, movements that belonged to a woman who had once run a household without thinking twice. Ethan entered a few minutes later, his presence quiet but firm. He wore a gray sweater over a collared shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, and there was a faint trace of stubble along his jaw. He looked less like the untouchable executive she had met 2 nights ago, and more like a man who had forgotten how to rest. "You're up early," he said, voice low. "I couldn't sleep much," Grace admitted. "I thought I'd make breakfast to thank you." She smiled hesitantly, and Ethan nodded. "That's kind of you. You didn't have to." Rex padded into the room and sat beside her, tail flicking once. Lily followed soon after, still wearing the oversized pajama top Ethan had found in a storage drawer. She rubbed her eyes and grinned at the sight of the dog. "Morning, Rex." The shepherd rose and pressed his head into the child's small hands, patient as stone. Grace laughed softly. It was a sound that surprised Ethan, the sound of something healing itself. Later that morning, as snow fell again in thin veils, Grace ventured outside to sweep the porch steps. She moved with a quiet determination that caught Ethan's attention as he watched from the window. Her profile, framed by the soft gray sky, tugged at something long dormant inside him. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gentle concentration when she leaned down to brush snow from the railing. It mirrored his wife, Rebecca, so precisely that his breath faltered. Rebecca had been the kind of woman who found purpose in small things. Feeding stray cats, leaving notes in his briefcase that said, "Don't forget to eat lunch." She had been laughter in a world made of deadlines. Now, seeing Grace under the falling snow, he felt that same vibration of warmth, painful and sweet. He turned away, uneasy, and busied himself with his computer, though the screen stayed blank for a long while. By midday, Grace had begun organizing the house, polishing furniture, rearranging the pantry, washing the linens in lavender detergent she found in the cabinet. She hummed to herself without realizing it, a tune that drifted through the hallways like the ghost of comfort. Ethan passed by the laundry room once and paused, his hand resting on the doorframe. "You don't need to do all this," he said. Grace looked up from folding sheets, her eyes gentle but steady. "I need to feel useful," she replied. "Doing helps me think less." Ethan wanted to ask what she meant, but her gaze dropped to the fabric, and he understood there were stories she wasn't ready to tell. That afternoon, a visitor arrived unexpectedly. A woman named Maria Thompson, the housekeeper who came once a week before Ethan had dismissed most of the staff. She was in her late 50s, sturdy and round-faced, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a bun and eyes that missed nothing. Maria had worked for the Coles for nearly a decade, through marriage, loss, and Ethan's withdrawal from the world. When she stepped into the foyer and saw Grace and Lily by the fire, her brows lifted. "Well, I'll be," she said. "Didn't expect to see anyone new here." Ethan appeared, greeting her with a small nod. "Maria, this is Grace Miller and her daughter Lily. They'll be staying for a while." Maria's expression softened as she looked at the woman and child. "Goodness, they look half-starved. I'll bring some things from my garden next time." Grace thanked her shyly, and Maria smiled, studying Ethan from the corner of her eye. "It's good to see the house not so quiet," she said before heading toward the kitchen. Ethan didn't respond, but later, as Maria left, she patted his arm. "Your wife would have liked her," she murmured. The words lingered long after the door closed. That evening, Lily sat cross-legged on the living room rug, drawing with colored pencils Maria had unearthed from a drawer. Rex lay beside her, his massive head resting on his paws, one amber eye half open to watch the child's every move. Grace prepared tea while Ethan built a fire. When she entered the room, he looked up, watching the way the firelight touched her hair and skin. She caught his gaze, uncertain, then smiled politely and offered him a cup. They sat across from each other in the flickering glow, the air filled with the crackle of burning wood and the whisper of snow against the windows. Grace spoke first, her voice soft. "This place doesn't feel lonely anymore." Ethan hesitated before answering. "It hasn't felt like a home in a long time." His tone carried the weight of years he'd never explained. Grace studied him quietly, sensing that the man before her had built walls not of arrogance, but of grief. "Sometimes walls keep warmth in too," she said gently. Her words stayed with him after she went upstairs to put Lily to bed. Later, Ethan stood at the foot of the staircase, hearing the faint rhythm of Grace's voice as she read a bedtime story. The cadence, soothing, melodic, was painfully familiar. Rebecca had read like that, and when Lily laughed, a light, spontaneous sound, Ethan felt something in his chest shift, almost crack. He leaned against the banister, staring at the warm glow spilling from the guest room door. For a fleeting instant, the scene blurred with memory. Rebecca sitting there instead, reading to a child who never came to be, her dark hair gleaming under the same light. The ache rose and fell in waves, but beneath it was something unexpected. A quiet gratitude that life, in its cruel, unasked way, had brought sound back into his house. Upstairs, Grace's voice faded as Lily drifted to sleep. Ethan turned away, walking slowly toward his room. Rex followed a step behind, pausing at the stairs' midpoint to glance back toward the guest hallway. The dog's ears twitched, as if even he could sense the echo of a love that wasn't finished, only interrupted. The storm that night was different from the quiet snowfalls before. The wind tore through the trees like something alive, scattering the calm that had slowly begun to settle over the house. The branches of the pines rattled against the windows, and the cold crept into every seam. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the living room walls. Grace sat on the sofa with Lily asleep in her lap, the child's small hand curled around her mother's finger. Rex lay close to them, his body tense despite his stillness, amber eyes flicking toward the door every few seconds. Ethan was in his study upstairs, sorting through a stack of documents that had gathered dust since before Grace's arrival. But his attention kept drifting, his mind replaying the words Maria had spoken days earlier. Your wife would have liked her. The thought was both a comfort and a quiet ache. He rubbed his temples, then closed the laptop, deciding it was late enough to stop pretending he was working. That was when the sound came. A pounding at the front door. Harsh, violent, the kind that made walls vibrate. Rex lifted his head, ears standing straight. The dog's low growl rumbled through the silence like distant thunder. Grace startled, her breath catching in her throat. The second knock, or perhaps it was a fist now, came louder, followed by a slurred shout that cut through the howl of the wind. "Grace, you think you can hide from me?" The voice was unmistakable even before she saw him. Rick Dawson, her ex-husband, the man she had run from in the dead of night 2 weeks ago. Grace froze. Her face went pale, eyes wide as the sound of her past clawed at the present. Rick's voice, once smooth when he wanted something, now rasped with alcohol and bitterness. "You and that brat of yours, open the damn door!" Ethan's footsteps echoed down the stairs, slow and deliberate. He was still in his sweater and dark trousers, his expression unreadable but his presence solid as stone. "Stay here," he said quietly to Grace, and she nodded, clutching Lily tighter. Rex stood, the fur along his back rising, a low snarl vibrating in his chest. When Ethan opened the door, the cold slammed into the room. Snow whirled in behind a man who looked like he'd been carved from the storm itself. Rick was in his mid-30s, tall but unsteady, with a frame once athletic now hollowed by drink. His eyes, bloodshot and wild, darted around the entryway. His face carried the remains of a handsomeness ruined by neglect. A stubble of uneven beard, a jagged scar near his jaw, a mouth twisted more by rage than cruelty. He wore a flannel jacket that reeked of whiskey and smoke. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Rick demanded, his words slurring slightly. "You keeping my wife here? My kid?" Ethan didn't raise his voice. "You need to leave." Rick laughed, the sound hollow. "Leave? You rich bastards think you can buy whatever you want, huh? You think she's yours now?" He took a step forward, wobbling, eyes narrowing on Ethan's calm. "You think because you've got money, she'll forget who she belongs to?" "Grace doesn't belong to anyone," Ethan said evenly. "Least of all a man who puts his hands on her." Rick's eyes flared. "You don't know a damn thing about us." He shoved Ethan's shoulder, but the older man didn't move an inch. The motion, small as it was, caused Rex to advance, lips curling, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. Rick froze, staring at the dog's bared teeth. Grace appeared behind Ethan then, Lily's frightened whimper muffled against her coat. "Rick, please," she said, voice trembling. "You're scaring her." "Scaring her," he barked, his face reddening. "You took her from me. You ran off, made me look like some kind of monster." "You did that yourself," Grace whispered. Something broke in him then. His expression hardened, and before Ethan could react, Rick lunged forward, grabbing Grace's arm. She cried out, stumbling. The world moved in flashes after that. The sharp bark of Rex as he launched himself between them, the heavy thud of Rick hitting the floor, the wild flurry of snow blowing in through the open door. Rex stood over him, snarling, his body a wall of muscle and fury. Rick raised his hands defensively, swearing. Ethan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Rex, back." The command came calm but firm, and the dog hesitated, then obeyed, retreating to Grace's side but not lowering his guard. Ethan looked down at Rick, breathing hard now. "You need to leave," he said again, quieter this time, but with an authority that left no room for argument. "You come here again, and I'll make sure the police handle it differently." Rick spat to the side, snow melting around him. You think you can replace me? He sneered. You can't. You'll never be her husband. Never that kid's father. Ethan's jaw tightened. I'm not trying to replace anyone, he said, but I won't let you hurt them again. The flashing lights appeared minutes later. The police, summoned by Maria, who had been driving home and saw the commotion from the road. Two officers, both wrapped in dark coats, guided Rick out to the patrol car despite his protests. One of them, Officer Daniel Ruiz, a young man with a calm but firm demeanor, looked back at Ethan as he took Rick's statement. Daniel was in his late 20s, clean-shaven, with an air of quiet patience born from too many domestic calls. We'll hold him overnight, he said. You might want to file a restraining order first thing in the morning. Grace nodded shakily, tears streaking down her face. Thank you. When the lights vanished into the snow, silence returned. Ethan closed the door, locking it twice before turning back. Grace was on her knees, beside Lily, who clung to her, crying softly. Ethan crouched down beside them, unsure what words could fit this moment. He reached out, hesitating, then gently rested a hand on Grace's shoulder. It's over, he said quietly. But Grace shook her head. It never really is, she whispered. Not with men like him. Rex nosed closer, pressing his weight against her knee, his steady warmth grounding her. Grace's trembling slowed, and Lily, exhausted from fear, fell asleep in her mother's arms. Ethan watched them for a long while, the fire's light catching on his face, carving the lines of conflict there. Grief, anger, something softer. When Grace finally lifted her gaze to him, her eyes were red but resolute. Why did you help us? She asked. Ethan looked past her to the empty window where snow drifted down in silence. Because once, he said slowly, someone I loved asked me to protect the ones who couldn't protect themselves. I wasn't there in time then. He met her eyes again. I won't make that mistake twice. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Grace leaned her forehead against his arm, a gesture of wordless gratitude. Rex settled beside them, sighing, the storm outside fading to a distant murmur. And somewhere inside Ethan Cole, a decision was made. Not in words, but in the stillness that followed. He could not bring back the life he had lost, but he could defend the fragile new one standing before him. The snow began to loosen its grip on Seattle, melting into silver veins that trickled down gutters and pooled along the edges of the streets. The air still carried a sharp chill, but every so often a current of softer wind passed through, smelling faintly of wet earth and cedar. The world was thawing, but slowly, as if it wasn't sure it was ready. Inside the Cole house, things had changed too. The days no longer passed in silence. There was laughter now, the soft murmur of voices, the sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen, the rhythmic tapping of Rex's claws across the floor. Grace had found her rhythm again. Up early, hair pulled back, her movements calm but purposeful. She had regained weight, color, a quiet confidence. When she smiled now, it reached her eyes. Ethan noticed these things the way one notices the seasons, gradually, without realizing when winter had started to fade. He found himself watching her sometimes when she spoke, the way her hands moved when she explained something to Lily, the way she listened when he did speak, as though words still mattered in a world full of noise. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the tall windows, Grace appeared at the doorway of his study, holding an envelope. She wore a light blue blouse tucked into gray slacks, her hair loosely pinned, a few strands falling against her cheek. They called, she said. The clinic in town. They want me to start next week. Ethan looked up from his papers. "That's good news," he said, meaning it. "Congratulations." Grace smiled, but it was the kind that trembled slightly. "It's part-time for now, but it's a start." He nodded, leaning back in his chair. "You're more than qualified. They're lucky to have you." Lily burst into the room then, clutching a handful of crayons. "Mommy, can Rex come outside? He wants to chase snowflakes." Rex, now more relaxed than Ethan had seen him in years, sat behind her, tail sweeping the floor like a metronome of patience. His coat gleamed with good health, and he had learned to tolerate Lily's endless chatter with saint-like endurance. "He can," Grace laughed, "but only if you wear your boots this time." Ethan watched the two leave through the back door, the sunlight catching on Lily's curls. When the door closed, he turned to Grace again. "I meant what I said before," he said quietly. "You don't have to leave right away. There's space here, for all of you." Grace looked down at the envelope in her hands. "Ethan," she said gently, "you've given us more than a home. You gave us safety, warmth, a chance to breathe again. But I can't stay forever. I need to learn to stand on my own feet again." Her tone was firm but kind, like a nurse explaining something painful but necessary. Ethan wanted to argue but didn't. Instead, he simply nodded. "If that's what you need." A few days later, the morning she left, the house felt strangely hollow. Maria came by to help with the packing. The older woman, dressed in her usual navy coat and wool scarf, supervised with the quiet authority of someone who had seen families leave and return before. "You take care of yourself, dear," Maria said, hugging Grace. "And that little one of yours, she's sunshine in shoes." Grace smiled, blinking back tears. "I will. Thank you, Maria." Outside, Lily tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Can Rex come visit us?" she asked. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her breath fogging in front of her. "Of course," Ethan said, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "He'll come anytime you call. Promise?" "I promise." Rex pressed his nose into her mitten, tail wagging once. Lily hugged his neck tightly. "Bye, Rex. Be good." Grace stood by the open car door, her face turned toward Ethan. "You've done more than you know," she said softly. "For both of us." Ethan's hands were in his coat pockets. His eyes met hers, and for a moment neither spoke. Words seemed inadequate for what had been shared. The quiet companionship, the unspoken understanding between two people learning how to breathe again. When the car pulled away, the crunch of tires over gravel echoed longer than it should have. Rex stood at the end of the driveway, ears pricked, watching until the vehicle disappeared beyond the trees. Then he turned back toward Ethan, letting out a low, questioning sound. "She'll be fine," Ethan murmured, though his voice wasn't entirely steady. He rested a hand on Rex's head. "They both will." Days passed. The snow melted completely, leaving the earth bare and soft. The house felt enormous again, the silence returning but changed, less suffocating, more like a pause. Ethan threw himself into work, into rebuilding old projects, but he found himself glancing at the window whenever the wind rattled it, half expecting laughter to spill through again. One Saturday morning, he decided to walk to the park. The air was damp and cool, the kind that clung to your lungs. He followed the same path where, months ago, he had first seen Grace and Lily huddled on that frozen bench. Now the trees dripped with thawed snow and the ground squelched under his boots. The bench was still there, the wood darkened by weather. On it, tucked beneath a small stone, was a folded piece of paper. He recognized the handwriting immediately, childish but careful. It read, "Dear Mr. Ethan, thank you for saving my mommy. She says we have a small place now, and it's warm. I'm going to have a puppy one day, and I'll take care of it like you take care of Rex. Mommy says you taught us that good people still exist. Love, Lily. Ethan read it twice, then once more, his breath clouding faintly in the cool air. He smiled, though his throat tightened. Folding the note, he slipped it into his coat pocket. For a long moment, he sat on the bench, the same place where winter had once found him frozen in grief. Now, though, the silence around him felt different. Not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that comes before something new begins. Rex nudged his knee, breaking the thought. Ethan looked down at the dog's patient face, the amber eyes filled with that strange, unspoken knowing. "Come on, boy," he said, rising. "Let's go home." As they walked back through the park, sunlight filtered weakly through the thinning clouds, and a single bud of green pushed through the frost by the path. Ethan paused, smiling at it. Spring hadn't fully come. Not yet. But it was close enough to believe in again. Sometimes, God doesn't move mountains in front of us. He sends someone to walk beside us through the storm. Ethan thought his life had ended the day he lost his wife and child. Grace believed the world had no mercy left for a woman like her. Yet through a single act of kindness on a winter night, 2 broken souls found warmth again. That wasn't luck. That was a quiet miracle. The kind that only love, compassion, and God's hand can weave together. We often wait for miracles to fall from the sky, but maybe miracles are simply ordinary people doing extraordinary kindness. Every helping hand, every "Are you okay?" whispered to a stranger, those are small pieces of heaven placed in our path. So if this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. Perhaps you are someone's miracle waiting to happen. Share this story to remind others that God still works through people. Comment below what this story made you feel, a memory, a prayer, or a moment of grace you've experienced. Subscribe to our channel so together we can keep spreading stories of faith, hope, and love. And as you go back to your own life tonight, may God bless your home, your heart, and every quiet act of kindness you give or receive. May His light guide you, and may you never forget that miracles still walk among us.